Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, was sentenced to death for setting off an explosion which killed 168 people and injured more than 600 others at the Murrah Federal Building.
March 15, 1963, Victor Feguer climbs the gallows after requesting the strangest last meal in death row history, a single olive with the pit still inside. He hoped an olive tree, the tree of peace, would one day sprout from his grave. Then 1984, James Edward Smith requests dirt for a voodoo ritual, warning he'd haunt the prison for 300 years if denied. Here are death row inmates with the most disturbing final meals, and what they reveal is chilling. March 15, 1963. A prison chef in Iowa prepares the strangest last meal request in death row history. No steak, no lobster, no elaborate feast. Just a single olive with the pit still inside. Victor Harry Feguer was 28 years old when he climbed 16 steps to a freshly constructed gallows, dressed in a crisp blue suit and dark tie. The product of a broken home and Michigan correctional institutions, he'd been convicted of one of the most senseless murders Iowa had ever seen. But what makes his case unforgettable isn't just the crime. It's what he did in his final hours and the peculiar hope he carried to his grave. July 11, 1960. Feguer sat in his rented room on Bluff Street in Dubuque, flipping through the yellow pages with deadly intent. He ran his finger down the alphabetical listing of physicians until he found the first name, Dr. Edward Bartles. The call was simple, calculated. His wife needed help, he claimed. Post-operative pain. A visiting accountant is desperate for medical assistance. Dr. Bartels was 34 years old, a respected general practitioner with 3 children and a 4th on the way. He'd served in the Navy, graduated from the University of Iowa Medical School, and returned home to serve his community. When that phone rang, he didn't hesitate. He left a note for his wife with the address, grabbed his medical bag, and drove his gray 1959 Rambler toward what he believed was an errand of mercy. There was no sick wife. There had never been. Feguer pulled a .38 caliber handgun he'd bought 2 days earlier with a bad check and forced the terrified doctor back to his car. They drove east across the Julian-Dubuque Bridge into Illinois to a wooded spot between East Dubuque and Galena. In those woods, Feguer shot Dr. Bartels once in the head and left him face up among the trees. Then he drove away wearing the dead doctor's stethoscope. FBI agents arrested Feguer in Birmingham, Alabama, 5 days later when he tried selling the Rambler without paperwork at a used car lot. A suspicious dealer thought his face looked familiar from wanted posters. Under interrogation, Feguer told agents where to find the body, but blamed the killing on someone named Alex Dupree, a completely fictional person, according to his attorney, Fred White. The defense had one argument: prove he was crazy. A parade of psychiatrists testified about Feguer's documented mental illness. He'd been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic years earlier. His attorneys made a final desperate play. They drove to Des Moines to meet with Governor Harold Hughes, a capital punishment opponent who would later sign the law abolishing Iowa's death penalty. Hughes called the White House, pulling President John F. Kennedy away from the swimming pool. Kennedy had reviewed the case but found no reason for clemency. The crime was too brutal, too calculated. The night before his execution, Feguer stayed up with 2 priests, debating whether to make a speech against capital punishment from the gallows. 25 minutes before his scheduled walk to the noose, he leaned too far back in his swivel chair and nearly tipped over.
If I'm not careful, I'll break my neck prematurely.
Then came the request that would immortalize him. For his final meal, Feguer asked for a single olive with the pit intact. Nothing else. When guards asked why, his answer was almost poetic. He hoped that an olive tree, the tree of peace, would one day sprout from his grave. At 5:30 in the morning, Feguer walked calmly to the gallows. 27 witnesses watched as a marshal fastened straps around his arms and legs, then fitted the noose snug against his neck. Feguer's gum chewing quickened, his chest inflated with deep breaths as the black hood covered his face. The trapdoor opened. His thin neck snapped. 9 minutes later, after his body stopped swaying, he was pronounced dead. Reports later claimed that when officials went through his belongings, they found the olive pit tucked in his suit pocket. For 37 years after Victor Feguer's execution, the federal government didn't put another prisoner to death. His dying wish came true in Iowa when the state abolished capital punishment in 1965. Until June 11, 2001, when Timothy McVeigh's execution for the Oklahoma City bombing brought federal executions roaring back. No one claimed Feguer's body. He was buried in an unmarked grave, and no olive tree ever grew from it. But that single olive has given him his only measure of immortality. Feguer, author Henry Hargreaves recreated death row final meals in his haunting series, No Seconds, and Feguer's was his favorite.
It's just such a polarizing image,
Hargreaves said.
It's so simple, beautiful, and kind of final. It's like a full stop at the end of his life.
If Feguer's olive symbolized hope for peace, the next inmate's request would reveal a man who saw death not as an ending, but as a doorway he desperately needed the right key to unlock. April 5, 1984. Prison officials at a Texas facility prepared themselves for what should have been a routine last meal delivery. But when 37-year-old James Edward Smith made his request, staff exchanged bewildered glances. He didn't want steak. He didn't want lobster. He wanted dirt, specifically Rayacunda dirt, March 7, 1983. Smith walked into the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston wearing a stocking mask and carrying a gun. He approached the teller's window, demanded money, but when refused, turned his attention to District Manager Larry Don Rojas. Rojas complied, pulling cash from the drawer and placing it into a plastic bag. He did everything right. He cooperated. He even started removing a bracelet from his wrist after pleading for his life. Smith shot him twice anyway. The second bullet hit Rojas in the chest, killing him hours later at the hospital. Two office workers chased Smith through a field and into an apartment complex. Smith fired back during the pursuit before tripping and being subdued by bystanders. A passing detective arrested him with the stolen money and the murder weapon nearby. His trial was swift. Conviction came on April 5, 1984. Death by lethal injection was the sentence. But Smith had other plans. While behind bars, he'd embraced voodoo. He practiced rituals, studied the traditions, and genuinely believed in reincarnation. The Rayacunda dirt wasn't just dirt to him. It was the key component of a sacred ritual that would ensure his soul passed into the next life successfully. Without it, he'd be trapped, incomplete, lost. Prison officials denied the request. Dirt wasn't on the approved list of foods. Smith was furious. He warned them that by refusing his wish, he'd haunt the prison for 300 years. Then something unexpected occurred. Smith received a last-minute stay of execution, rescheduled for 1990. When the new execution date approached, Smith made the exact same request. Another lump of Rayacunda dirt, another attempt at his voodoo ritual. Prison officials denied him again. This time, Smith settled for a pot of plain yogurt instead. On June 26, 1990, James Edward Smith was executed by lethal injection. His last words, Hare Krishna. The case left prison staff genuinely unnerved, not because of the violence of his crime, but because Smith's belief in his voodoo ritual was so absolute that he threatened supernatural revenge when denied. Whether he actually haunts that Texas prison for 300 years remains to be seen. During his arrest, Smith confessed to 6 additional ritualistic murders, though they could never be proven. He waived his appeals, seemingly eager to face execution and move on to what he believed would be reincarnation. His determination to speed up his own death raised questions about whether he genuinely believed in his spiritual path or simply wanted to escape accountability. The tradition of last meals in Texas continued for another 21 years after Smith's execution. James Edward Smith's request for dirt stands as one of the most unsettling moments in this dark chapter of American criminal justice. Not because of what he asked for, but because of what it represented. A man so committed to his beliefs that even facing death, he saw it as merely a transition, a doorway, and he desperately wanted that lump of dirt to open it. Smith's uneaten yogurt marked the end of his spiritual quest, but 13 years later, another Texas inmate's uneaten meal would end an 87-year tradition entirely.
The dragging death of James Byrd Jr. 13 years later, Lawrence Russell Brewer, the first defendant to receive an execution date, has granted his first interview.
September 21st, 2011. Lawrence Russell Brewer was just hours from his execution when Texas prison officials approached him about his final meal request. What he ordered would not only become infamous, it would end a tradition that had existed since the 1920s. Brewer had been convicted of one of the most horrific hate crimes in American history. June 7, 1998, Jasper, Texas. James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man, was walking home from a party when Brewer and two accomplices offered him a ride. What followed was unspeakable brutality.
Tied by it with a chain and dragged for several miles down Huff Creek Road on the outskirts of Jasper. It was June 7, 1998.
The crime shocked the nation. Byrd was beaten, spray-painted, urinated on, then chained by his ankles to the back of a pickup truck and dragged for 3 miles down a remote country road. He was alive for most of it, conscious, trying desperately to keep his head up as his body was torn apart on the pavement. His body finally separated when it hit a culvert. Authorities later found remains scattered across 81 different locations. 13 years later, Brewer sat on death row preparing for his final moments. Texas prison tradition allowed condemned inmates to request a special last meal, a practice rooted in centuries of history. For most inmates, this final choice represented something profound, a last connection to the outside world, a final act of autonomy, a small comfort before the end. Brewer's request was extraordinary. 2 chicken fried steaks smothered in gravy with sliced onions, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger with all the fixings, a cheese omelet loaded with ground beef, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos, a large bowl of fried okra with ketchup, 1 pound of barbecue with half a loaf of white bread, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, 3 root beers, 1 pint of Bluebell vanilla ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts. The meal was prepared. The trays were set before him. And then, nothing. Brewer didn't touch a single bite. He claimed he wasn't hungry. Even in his final interview from death row, Brewer showed the same callousness that marked his crime. Former Jasper County Sheriff Billy Rolls, who had worked the original case, wasn't buying it. The evidence told a different story.
When you scratches on the throat for a month and done it.
Billy Rolls was the Jasper County Sheriff when Byrd was dragged to his death.
The forensic evidence was undeniable. Byrd's injuries showed he had been alive when the dragging began, conscious, aware, suffering. When asked whether he felt any remorse for what he'd done, Brewer's answer was shocking.
Yeah, I have no regrets. No, I would do it all over again, to tell you the truth.
And if given the chance to speak to Byrd's family,
absolutely nothing. Only one possibility would be I would have liked to have spoke with the mom and the father, telling face to face exactly what happened, in private instead of in front of it, through the media or through the courts.
The news of Brewer's extravagant uneaten meal spread quickly. Texas State Senator John Whitmire was outraged. In a letter to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, he wrote,
"It is extremely inappropriate to give a person sentenced to death such a privilege. He never gave his victim an opportunity for a last meal."
Whitmire made his position clear: end the practice immediately, or he would introduce legislation to force the issue. The next day, TDCJ Executive Director Brad Livingston agreed. Just like that, an 87-year tradition ended. From that day forward, Texas death row inmates would receive the same meal as every other prisoner in the unit. No special requests, no final choices, no last meals. The decision sparked fierce debate. Brian Price, the former Texas prison cook who had prepared over 200 last meals, was devastated. He even offered to continue preparing final meals at his own expense. He understood something that others didn't. These meals weren't really about food. Most inmates ordered simple things: comfort foods from childhood, their mother's cooking, a taste of life before prison. Price remembered inmates requesting specific brands because that's what their grandmother used to buy. He recalled men who couldn't finish their meals because their stomachs were too tied in knots with fear. The last meal tradition wasn't about rewarding criminals. It was about preserving a small piece of humanity in an inherently dehumanizing process. For prison staff who spent years knowing these inmates, who would have to watch them die, the ritual provided a moment of connection. Texas stood alone in its decision. Other states maintained their last meal traditions, though many had restrictions. Some imposed spending limits: $50 in California, $40 in Florida, $20 in Georgia, just $15 in Oklahoma. But they kept the tradition alive. The irony is bitter. Texas, the state that executes more people than any other, had been among the most generous in honoring last meal requests. Now it offered nothing, all because of Lawrence Brewer. Brewer's execution proceeded as scheduled. His final official statement was brief.
Capital punishment. Them, without the capital, get the punishment.
No apology, no remorse, nothing. John William King, Brewer's co-defendant, was executed 8 years later in 2019. He too declined to speak any final words from the gurney. The third man involved, Sean Berry, received life in prison. He had shown remorse for his actions. That small acknowledgement of humanity made all the difference. Today, Texas continues to execute more prisoners than any other state, 275 since the death penalty resumed in 1976. Each one receives the same meal as every other inmate that day. Whatever's on the menu. No choices, no requests, no last meals. Brewer's disturbing final meal, or rather, his refusal of it, accomplished something remarkable. It stripped away the last pretense of mercy in America's busiest death chamber. Whether that's justice or cruelty depends on who you ask. But this much is certain: Lawrence Russell Brewer didn't just take his own life to the grave that September night. He took a piece of humanity from every person who would follow him into that execution chamber. Brewer's refusal revealed calculated cruelty, but the next case would expose something far more disturbing: a final meal that raised questions about whether the condemned man even understood he was about to die. January 24th, 1992, Ricky Ray Rector sits down to a last meal: steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and a slice of pecan pie. He eats everything but the pie. He tells a guard he's
saving it for later.
March 21st, 1981, Rector opened fire outside a dance hall in Conway, Arkansas, killing Arthur Criswell and wounding others. 3 days later, he agreed to surrender to a longtime local officer, Robert Martin. When Martin arrived at Rector's family home, Rector shot him. Then Rector shot himself in the head. Surgeons saved Rector's life but removed a large portion of his frontal lobe. The injury left him permanently brain damaged. Tests placed his IQ near 70. Friends, lawyers, and fellow inmates described a man who had once struggled in school and who, after the surgery, behaved like a child: simple, concrete, sometimes bewildered. Rector was tried and convicted for the murders. His lawyers argued he was not competent to be executed. 3 separate psychiatric evaluations found him competent. Courts applied the legal standard at the time. If a prisoner understands that he is to be executed and why, he is not insane for execution purposes. Judges ruled Rector met that standard. January 16, 1992, a clemency panel voted against mercy. The decision landed squarely in the middle of Bill Clinton's presidential campaign. Clinton returned to Arkansas and denied Rector clemency. Critics accused politics of playing a role. Supporters argued the system had run its course. But the image that followed the case is small and unsettling: the untouched slice of pecan pie. That piece of pie, left on the tray until after the execution, became shorthand for a larger question. Did Rector truly understand what later meant? Was he able to grasp the finality of execution? Or did his injury leave him unable to comprehend death? January 24, 1992, the execution was scheduled for 9:15 p.m. The process did not run smoothly. Medical technicians struggled for more than 50 minutes to find a usable vein. Spectators listened through a closed curtain and heard moans as staff worked. Rector reportedly tried to help them, cheerful and oblivious, as if undergoing a routine medical procedure. At 10:09 p.m., the lethal injection was administered, and Rector was declared dead. The pie and the delay haunted witnesses and officials. At least one corrections employee later resigned, saying the experience had been too distressing. Newspaper profiles and legal scholars framed Rector's last meal as evidence of a mind that had slipped its moorings. Literal proof that the state had executed a man who lacked full comprehension. Medical experts and legal scholars continued to debate the line between legal competence and moral responsibility. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in 1986 in Ford v. Wainwright that executing the insane violates the Eighth Amendment. But what counts as insane is narrow under the law. Awareness of punishment and its reason remains the key test. Rector's case exposed how brittle that test can be when brain damage is profound but not absolute. Over the following decade, the country's understanding of intellectual disability and the death penalty shifted. June 20th, 2002, the Supreme Court held in Atkins v. Virginia that executing people with intellectual disability is cruel and unusual punishment. Rector's execution, and the horror people felt at his pie for later, fed public and judicial conversations about dignity, culpability, and the limits of punishment. May 10, 1994. The killer clown sat down for his final meal before execution. A bucket of KFC original recipe chicken, 12 fried shrimp, French fries, a pound of strawberries, and a Diet Coke. For a man convicted of murdering 33 young men and boys, John Wayne Gacy's last request was disturbingly ordinary. Before his crimes were exposed, Gacy had managed 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo. He knew their secret recipe by heart. He'd entertained children at hospitals dressed as Pogo the Clown. He'd been the neighborhood's friendly contractor, the guy who threw epic summer parties, the perfect American success story. But beneath that cheerful exterior lurked something monstrous.
You can never tell the Gacy story enough, particularly for a new generation, because he just represents, we want to think that serial killers act and look like serial killers all the time.
The tradition of the last meal stretches back centuries. It's meant to be a final act of humanity, a moment where the condemned can choose one thing before losing everything. For Gacy, that bucket of chicken was a callback to his former life, when he was John Wayne Gacy, the successful businessman, instead of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer, before the bodies were discovered beneath his house. According to prison officials, Gacy was chatty during his final day. He talked about the Chicago Cubs. He made small talk like he was at a backyard barbecue instead of hours from death. Even his attorney, Karen Conti, later said he didn't seem to grasp the finality of what was coming. He socialized with visitors. He laughed. He remained to the very end, disturbingly upbeat. The meal arrived on standard prison dishware. Nothing fancy. Just the food he'd requested, served at room temperature because security protocols don't allow for hot deliveries. Gacy ate methodically, washing everything down with that Diet Coke. Outside Stateville Correctional Center, crowds gathered. Nearly 1,000 people filled the courtyard, many celebrating, some protesting. They sang, "Nana, hey, hey, kiss him goodbye," so loudly it could be heard inside the prison walls. Some held signs mocking his clown persona. For the families of his victims, this wasn't just an execution. It was closure decades in the making. William Kunkel, one of the prosecutors who tried the case, attended the execution. He'd gone to a celebratory barbecue beforehand with fellow attorneys. When asked why he wanted to witness it, his answer was chilling.
I wanted to be sure he was dead.
Shortly before midnight, Gacy was led from his holding cell to the execution chamber. Unlike some inmates who use their final moments for apologies or prayers, Gacy had something else in mind. His last words became infamous.
Kiss my ass.
3 words. No remorse, no acknowledgement of the 33 lives he'd stolen, no consideration for the families still searching for closure, just pure defiance. The lethal injection should have taken minutes. Instead, a clog in the IV line delayed the process. The first drug knocked him unconscious, but the second drug couldn't flow through properly. For 10 to 20 minutes, nothing happened. Prison officials scrambled to fix the problem while witnesses watched in uncomfortable silence. Finally, the line cleared. The injection continued. The third drug stopped his heart at 12:58 a.m. Total time, 18 minutes, 4 times longer than expected. Some saw it as poetic justice, a small taste of the terror his victims must have felt.
The horror of what he did and the idea that all victims of crime deserve the same dignity was part of my thinking there.
The crowd outside erupted when news of the execution spread. Cheers, applause. The kind of celebration usually reserved for sporting victories, not state-sanctioned death. But for many, this was victory, the end of a nightmare that had haunted Chicago for decades. Gacy's final meal tells us something about the banality of evil. Here was a man who'd committed unspeakable acts, who'd buried bodies beneath his home like they were trash, who'd destroyed countless families. And when given the chance to request anything for his last meal, he chose fast food chicken. The same chicken he'd served to customers years ago. The same chicken millions of Americans eat without a second thought. His death didn't bring back the victims. It didn't erase the trauma, but it did ensure that John Wayne Gacy would never hurt anyone again. And for the families who'd waited 14 years for justice, watching him consume that final meal, knowing what came next, that was enough. The killer clown had performed his last act. The curtain had finally closed. Gacy's bucket of KFC revealed the disturbing ordinariness of a serial killer. But the next inmate's choice would expose something even more chilling. A mass murderer who saw himself as a patriot and his 168 victims as acceptable casualties of war.
Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, was sentenced to death for setting off an explosion which killed 168 people and injured more than 600 others at the Murrah Federal Building.
June 10, 2001. Timothy McVeigh sat in a stark isolation cell at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, waiting for death. The man who had killed 168 innocent people in the Oklahoma City bombing had one simple request for his final meal: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Nothing more, just ice cream. While some death row inmates choose elaborate feasts, McVeigh's choice was almost childlike in its simplicity. It was the dessert of a man who claimed he felt no remorse, who compared his victims to stormtroopers in Star Wars, guilty merely by association with what he called an evil empire. The bombing itself was meticulously planned. April 19, 1995, in the second anniversary of the Waco siege that had radicalized him beyond redemption, McVeigh had been transformed from a decorated Gulf War veteran into America's deadliest domestic terrorist. McVeigh never wavered in his conviction that his actions were justified. During his 1997 trial, prosecutors presented 137 witnesses. His defense attorney, Stephen Jones, tried everything. He argued the FBI botched the investigation. He attacked star witness Michael Fortier as a drug-dealing liar. But how do you defend a man who had told his own sister the bombing was coming? Who carried earplugs in his getaway car to protect his hearing from the blast? The jury deliberated for 23 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all 11 counts. But McVeigh's death sentence trial revealed something even more chilling. In March 2000, he sat down for an interview with Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes. Due to his ongoing appeals, his lawyers had forbidden Bradley from asking one crucial question.
Because of his appeal, one of the conditions his lawyer laid down was that we not ask him directly, "Are you the Oklahoma City bomber?"
During that interview, McVeigh attempted to humanize himself, to challenge what he knew the public thought of him.
Maybe one of the benefits of me talking to you today is that you'll see that maybe not everything is true that you've heard about me.
Bradley didn't let him off easy. The correspondent confronted McVeigh with the brutal reality of how America saw him.
But sitting down here now, and let me make clear, I'm not sitting here trying to influence you, and I'm not putting on a game face. I'm not conning anybody. I'm just being me.
The man was not being honest. He was a terrorist who murdered 168 people and called it a legit tactic in his imagined war against the government. By January 2001, McVeigh had dropped all his appeals. He wanted to die. Perhaps he realized that life in a Colorado Supermax prison wasn't the martyrdom he'd envisioned. Or maybe he simply wanted to control one last thing: the timing of his own death. His execution was initially scheduled for May 16, 2001, but was delayed when the FBI discovered over 4,000 pages of evidence they'd failed to turn over to his defense team. McVeigh saw it as more proof of government corruption. On June 10th, guards transferred McVeigh from his cell to the death house. According to his attorney, Robert Nye, McVeigh remained remarkably calm. He even joked with guards when the shower ran cold, calling it
cruel and unusual punishment.
That afternoon, around 1 p.m., prison officials brought him his requested meal: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. He ate it alone in his 9-by-14-foot cell, watching cable television on a small black and white set, a special privilege for the condemned. His parents had made their peace. His army buddies had said goodbye. All that remained was the walk to the execution chamber. The morning of June 11, 2001, McVeigh woke before dawn. He showered, dressed in a standard-issue shirt and khaki pants, and was led to the execution chamber at 7 a.m. 30 witnesses watched through glass panels as guards strapped him to a padded gurney. Another 300 victims and family members gathered in Oklahoma City to watch via closed-circuit television. McVeigh made no final statement. Instead, he left a handwritten copy of the poem, Invictus, with its defiant closing lines.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
As the lethal drugs entered his veins, he lifted his head and made eye contact with the witnesses. At 7:14 a.m., Timothy McVeigh was pronounced dead. For many victims' families, the execution brought no real closure. Tom Kite, who was raising his granddaughter after losing his stepdaughter in the bombing, put it simply:
The execution is just an end to one part of this. It's not closure.
Bud Welch, who lost his 23-year-old daughter, chose not to watch. A Texas couple who'd witnessed their son's killer's execution had warned him,
"There is nothing good about watching a human take their last breath that is gonna give you any peace."